This presentation, titled FSSC 22000, moving into version 5, comes to us from Nuno Soares. Nuno is an author, consultant, and trainer who has spent the last 20 years working as a food product engineer. His latest book, ISO and the FSSC 22000 Blueprint, is out now. He holds an MBA as well as a PhD, which was earned through investigating and developing a new frozen fish glazing solution. In 2018, Nuno was presented with the title of Food Engineer Specialist by the Portuguese Engineering Professional Association. He currently works exclusively providing support to food safety professionals, striving to achieve a more fulfilling career based on the foundation of continued learning and improved competencies. And with that, take it away, Nuno.
Thank you. Thank you, Michael. I'm really proud to be here again with another presentation for your show, for your Food Safety Expo. As you told, this is just a section of my ebook about ISO 22000 and FSSC 22000 Blueprint. And today I will try to present you briefly what is new and what is the main characteristics of the new version of FSSC 22000. I will start with a brief introduction, and then we'll go through all the additional requirements that are mandatory, okay? Just for your information, some history facts, okay? FSSC was published in 2009, it was 10 years ago, more or less, and it started as a combination of ISO 22000 and PAS, okay? Then during 10 years, they had new scopes and also a new model regarding quality. Last year, they published the version 5 of the food safety system, and now it is mandatory since January. What are the main components of the food safety system? This scheme incorporates ISO standards, okay, a sector-specific technical specifications for PRPs, prerequisite programs, and market-driven additional requirements. These are the three main components. Regarding prerequisites, I present you on the left a list of the ISO TS 20002 family that are used, not only, but we will see that briefly. And on the right, you have some additional requirements that are mandatory for FSSC 22000. Notice that there is 9 additional requirements. 5 of them, I would like to emphasize right now, are applicable to all scopes. The first 5 that are presented in orange. The last 4 are specific for some of the specific scopes, okay? Next slide, I present to you what were the reasons for updating that FSSC shared inside the new document. They explained that they start updating because it was published the new ISO, of course, to enable integrated management systems audits for the FSSC 22000 quality, to comply with Global Food Safety Initiative benchmarking requirements, and also to comply with relevant accreditation body requirements. If you are not familiarized with FSSC 22000, this will be a good news, because all documents regarding this system are available on their website and are for free. Take also advantage of the official translations. So there are 5 different languages for now: for Chinese, French, Japanese, Portuguese, and Spanish. Of course, English is the official language, but you can download the documents in each of these languages already on their website. On this slide, on this picture, I try to explain you the main difference between ISO 22000 and BRC and DFS and FSSC. Okay, BRC and DFS are other food safety systems that are already inside the GFSI umbrella, that are closer to FSSC in some aspects, but far from ISO 22000. So what I try to present here is that FSSC 22000, it was a way to bring ISO inside the GFSC umbrella. There are several differences, but the main difference, of course, is that, for instance, ISO 22000 is a non-profit and global institution. Okay, it's ISO who manages it. And for instance, BRC and the FS are private, and they were started at the beginning by originally by retailers and still retailers companies, and still today some retailer companies say that this BRC or EFS are mandatory. So if people want to supply them with private labels, so this is a really different approach. Okay, ISO 22000 is also a management system. Okay, it's not like BRC EFS. And another interesting characteristic of ISO is that it is only in one document for all the supply chain. Okay, instead BRC and EFS, they have several documents for each scopes. Okay, regarding the FSSC 22000, as you can see in diagram, is close to ISO because ISO is inside FSSC. So you have to have ISO if you want to go for FSSC 22000 certification. But FSC has already also additional requirements. These additional requirements precisely to add requirements that are necessary to comply with GFSI that ISO doesn't have. Okay, so these are a simple way for you to understand that this is how FSC in some way was the way to ISO comes inside of the GFSI umbrella. This is a slide where I try to present you the main structure of FSSC certification scheme. This was taken from the FSC website, and you can see on the left that are the main structure of the scheme. You have, as I explained you, a big document that is the FSC 22000 scheme version 5. That is the main document. And then you have 7 annexes and 2 guidance, a guidance for food defense and a guidance for food for mitigation that were released together with this version 5. I want also to point out that on the right, you have the structure of the scheme version 5. And inside this scheme version 5, you can find 6 parts and 2 appendix. Most of the attention of organizations that want to be certified naturally goes to part 1 and part 2 of this scheme version 5. But I advise you to take a look to part 3, where it is possible for you to find information regarding planning and managing audits and unannounced audits. Okay, for example. Also important, in my opinion, is the definitions in Appendix 1, okay? Because it's very important that everyone understands the concepts and speak somehow the same language, okay? For instance, I come here, this is a different slide, as you can see in the structure, because some slides will be to explain you about some specific changes that you can find from version 4.1 and version 5. In definitions, as I told you, there were many definitions that were removed, other were changed, and another were added, okay? In total, there are now 58 definitions, and only 9 of those are common with ISO 22000. So if you are not used to FSSC, you should go here and check the definitions. For instance, complaint, it was a definition that was changed. Blackout days was also changed. Follow-up audits is an example of a new definition. Serious event, another, and environment monitoring is also another example of new definition that was added in this new version. In the next slide, I show you again what are the requirements if an organization have or want to be certified by FSSC version 5. Okay, so you must have the ISO 22000-2018, of course. You have to comply with prerequisites and implement prerequisites according to specific technical specifications. You have also to comply with the additional requirements. And of course, if you are going for also for FSSC quality, you must comply with ISO 9001-2015 quality requirements. Okay. Another difference that is very important and that relies in this section is that, of course, now where before was used the ISO 22000-2005, the original the origin system from ISO, the original publication. Now it has been replaced by ISO 22000-2018. Okay, and again, as I said to you before, now it's also enabled the integrated management system audit for FSSC 22000 quality. This table is very interesting because it's a table where you can check out what are the normative documents for each category. Okay, in part 1 of the scheme, you can find the food chain categories that can be audited. Okay, this is only a selection of 2 examples, but these 2 examples are on purpose because if you notice, I highlighted there that the prerequisites are not the ISO TS family. Okay, so in the table, what you have the category, you have the subcategory, you have the description, and then you have examples. That is very interesting, and then you have in the last column the normative documents that are mandatory for this category. And you will notice that in these 2 that I present you, you have always the ISO 22000, of course, we have always the additional requirements, but you have different documents for prerequisites. Okay, because and these ones are the only ones that at the time of the publication in May last year were not under the ISO TS family. But meanwhile, in September, it was published the ISO TS 20002-5 transport and storage. So this will be used in the future, of course, when people want to certify under the scope of transport and storage. Prerequisites, well, there is always, this has been always a issue because people say that ISO don't have the prerequisites and they are not specific enough. And I'll try to address a little bit this, because if we go and check, for instance, the ISO TS 20002-1 that at the moment is under revision, you will see that they have there 15 prerequisites. Okay, but in my opinion, if you go to ISO 20000 and 2018, you will find that only 3 of these are not really present on the list of prerequisites that they have inside. That are the rework, that here is involved the product recall procedures, and also the food defense, biovigilance, and bioterrorism. But for me, there is most of these subjects are still inside the ISO. Okay, so if you notice, rework is mentioned inside ISO in the flow diagrams. Product recall is mentioned inside ISO in clause 8.9, and food defense is now also given mentioned as an example inside of clause 4.1. So it is very important to understand that is not the absence from ISO that is the main issue, is the amount of detail and requirements that the ISO TS family has to prerequisites that is more relevant. That is why I show you just a small example before we go to the additional requirements. For instance, when we talk about construction and layout of buildings inside of ISO TS, you can find specific requirements like these ones. For instance, building shall be durable, out of potential contaminated areas. So the building should be out of potentially contaminated areas. Site boundaries shall be identified. Assets shall be controlled, and vegetation tended and removed. These are only examples for you to understand that inside ISO TS 20002, there are much more specific requirements that people must follow to comply with the technical specification. Okay, And this is what I would like to present you regarding the introduction. And if you want, and I hope you want, I will follow up now and start talking about the additional requirements. Okay, we are going to go through all the additional requirements that are present in version 5 of FSSC 22000. This is only a brief presentation, but I will try to explain you the main characteristics of each one. So the first one is management of service, and this requirement was shortened because now it is part of the clause 7.1.6 of the ISO 20000:2018. Now, management of laboratory service is the only service that remains as an additional requirement. In this additional requirement, the organization shall or must ensure that in case external laboratories analysis service are used for the verification and or validation of food safety, this shall be conducted by a competent laboratory. Okay, it must have the capability to produce precise and repeatable test results using validated test methods and best practice. And this is why this is remaining inside the management of service. Okay, if you have a laboratory, an external laboratory, you must be sure that they use the right tests, they use validated tests, and usually people go to accreditation because this is a better way to make sure they comply with this best practice and this validated test. Okay, but this is the only thing that we are talking now regarding management of service. Everything else is now inside ISO and removed from the additional requirement. Reinforcing what I have just said, this is a change from last version. Okay, in last version, in version 4.1, it was described as what organizations shall ensure about service and which ones. Okay, which service should be controlled at the minimum. Now it's only subclause 3 that is maintained and is talking about, as I explained you, about the competence of laboratories. In the next slide, I will go to the product labeling. This additional requirement reinforces ISO 22000 in clause 8.5.1.3. I believe it's characteristics of end products. What this additional requirement talks is about ensuring that the finished products are labeled according to all applicable food safety, statutory and regulatory requirements in the country of intended uses. Okay, and this shall include also allergens, as you can see in the list below. So allergen labeling is now included in this additional requirement, and it is an excellent example because it's an example of an issue that can change depending on the organization and depending on the country especially. And I would like to recommend you, perhaps you can use this tool, that is a really interesting tool from the University of Nebraska, where you can research for the food allergen and see in which country they have any kind of labeling regulation regarding that allergen. Okay, so you can use this tool in two ways: or you click on the substance and see which countries have regulation on it, and the image, for instance, shows for crustacean shellfish, or the other way you can use it is a table where all the countries, so all the allergen substance, and you can understand in which country what are the main controls you must guarantee regarding allergens. Okay, next is about food defense. Okay, in food defense you must first comply. We must look, and I bring for you this is the definition for food defense from GFSI. according to GFSI, food defense is the process to ensure the security of food and drink from all forms of intentional malicious attack, including ideological motivated attack leading to contamination. Okay, I must say to you that you should look for the bold sections, because these are the main characteristics and the main more important to define what is food defense. Okay, in food defense, we are looking for intentional malicious attacks that lead to contamination. This is a different, for instance, regarding food fraud that we are going to talk in a few minutes, where for food fraud, the most or the major motivation is economical gain. Okay. When we talk about food defense, I believe that we have a problem. That's most of many organizations may not be aware of this as a problem. And my suggestion is that you suggest other people to go to the internet and research for food product adulteration by employees. You just search for this sentence in YouTube, for instance, and see the videos. And I will like to advise you that some may be disgusting. But after this research, I believe people will be for sure more aware of the issue. I bring you two pictures that are from recent cases in Australia and the USA. The image on the right is from 2019 case, where a girl opened a ice cream lid, licked the product, and then closed it again. And this was, well, I believe this is not the case aiming to cause a wide-scale public health harm, but more in search of social media likes, perhaps. But nevertheless, should make, and especially the ice cream manufacturer. And because if the ice cream manufacturer or producer thought as a thief, that is a good advice when you are developing your food defense, thought as a thief, they would find some kind of seal that could prevent easy access to the product, or at least be clear for everyone that the product has been already open. Okay. Regarding the picture on the left, it goes back to the 9th September 2018, when Ohoni, after beating a nice red strawberry, at the end of the day in Sunshine Coast University Hospital with a severe abdominal pain. Okay, he had ingested a needle intentionally planted by a former strawberry farm supervisor. There were 2,030 incidents, and 186 of those were included sewing needles. Okay, so it was really unfortunately covered by media, because it was really serious in Australia, this issue. Okay, in this slide, I try to present to you in a diagram what are the main steps included in the FSSC 2000 Food Defense Guide. As I explained you, the FSSC published a guide, one for food defense and one for food fraud, and I try to summarize the steps here in this diagram to make it easier for you. The first thing we must do is to assemble the food defense team. Okay, that is on the top right. Establish food defense team. That should be a multidisciplinary team with a wide range of expertise. For instance, you can find inside, if you want, security, quality, human resources, production. Well, people from this kind of jobs or from this kind of competences should be inside for sure. And be aware that the composition of the food defense is likely different from the HACCP team or even from the food fraud team. Okay, this team can evolve during the time. It's normal that you can change the people inside the team, and it's very train the team, okay? That is below. Define the training that is necessary for the team and also for the other person. Then, if you go to the top of the diagram, you find that it is important to identify as many threats as possible so they can be accessed. You must include both external risks elsewhere in the supply chain and internal risks, something that can happen inside your organization. All the potential threats identified shall be assessed for their significance. A risk matrix similar to HACCP can be used, is proposed by the guidance of FSSC. When significant risks, for instance, are identified within a group, we should take a more in-depth analysis to this threat, okay? And I will stop here a little bit to explain you the diagram, because I want to suggest you two useful tools to help you in the food defense program. For example, you can use the Food Defense Plan Builder. This is from FDA and supports organizations in preparing the food defense plan. And they help identify threats, vulnerabilities, and preventive measures. You can also check out the past 96 2017. It's very useful, but pay attention that this addresses not only food defense, but also food fraud. Both of these tools are free from charge, okay? As the guide suggests, we may use a risk matrix similar to HACCP, okay? A matrix likelihood of occurrence versus impact and consequence. But the guide is not really comprehensive in providing assistance to understand what we can use for likelihood or what we can use for impact. So I would like to suggest you that you may use accessibility, like in the case of the strawberries. You must think that if people have access to the product, it is more easy to do the attacks, okay? So primary production, like in the case of strawberries, are more access. People have more easy access to the products that for instance, in the industry. Then the likelihood of detection. If it is easy for people to spot an attack, of course, it's less probable that it is done or it will be successful. Think like I explained to you in the case of the ice cream, okay? Past incidents. It is important to know what has happened before, not only in your organization, but what is common in the industry, okay? Question regarding public health. So how impactful can be the attack to the public health? You must address that and understand how impactful any kind of attack can have in the public health. And the last thing I would propose to you would be the final product characteristics, because some product characteristics can facilitate attacks or their impact. For instance, if you produce large lots of a product, of course, the consequences on public health can be higher than if you produce small lots. But let's go back to the diagram so I can finish it and wrap it up. So we have finished just before the food defense plan, and now we must do it, okay? When we proceed to the plan, you must understand that the plan has to document all the threat assessment, the control measures, the verification, and incident management procedures, okay? The plan should also be supported, as you can see on the left, food safety management system for all its products. What this means? It means that in the plan, the plan should contain elements such, for instance, control measures, verification activities, corrections on corrective actions, for example, okay? The plan should also be reviewed regularly for its adequacy and for its effectiveness. That is the last one of the box of the diagram. And then we close it up because everything must be trained and communication. All this should be also defined inside your food defense program. Before we finish food defense, I would like to share with you, I will not go through all these questions, but I would like to share with you that inside the guidance, you will find several questions that the FSSC shares and say that this is examples of what will the auditor be looking for when they will assess your food defense program, okay? So you go in the guide and check it out because these are interesting for you to know what you should have. And that's it for food defense. And let's go for the next additional requirement. Let's go to food fraud. Food fraud, according to GFSI, is the collective term encompassing the intentional substitution, addition, tampering, or misrepresentation of food and feed ingredients, or food and feed packaging, labeling, product information, or false or misleading statements made about the product for economic gain that could impact consumer health. Okay, again, this is different from food defense since the main goal here is the economic gain, although impact consumer health can be a side effect. The guidance from FSSC points out there are three types of food-related risks that are possible in food fraud. So people can have a direct food safety risks when they are exposed to immediate risk. And for instance, as was the case of addition of melamine or undeclared allergens, they can also have an indirect food safety risk when it's exposed to risk by long-term exposure. And we can also have another issue that is a technical food fraud risk when, for instance, is the case that the material traceability is compromised, okay? What are now the 7 types of food fraud that are defined by GFSI? As you can see in this diagram, the 7 food fraud examples are dilution, substitution, concealment, unapproved enhancements, mislabeling, gray market theft, diversion, and counterfeiting. Inside, and this is, I won't go through all this because you can also find inside the guidance 2 tables, a big table where you can find by each of the GFSI type of food fraud, you can find definitions, examples, okay? And this is interesting for you to go through it and to understand better what kind of food fraud, types of food fraud are, and what is specific examples of this food fraud, okay? So I advise you to go into the guidance and check this table because it's very interesting. And one question that we must put always is that, can we finish the fraudulent activities? And of course not, because food fraud is as old as food trade. So we must focus our efforts to reduce the fraud opportunities and to mitigate, of course, the vulnerabilities. And this is important. So let's go now to a scheme. This diagram, it should look familiar because it's very, very close to the food defense diagram, okay? So again, I will go faster on this one because the boxes and the terms are very similar. So first thing, again, assemble the food fraud mitigation team. It must be a multidisciplinary, okay? Security, legal, persuading are examples of people that can be inside this team. Then you must, of course, identify as many vulnerabilities as possible, okay? And then address, and for this, you must address not only all types of food fraud, but also all products. Not only the products for incoming goods, for instance, raw materials, but also for outgoing foods, for instance, semi-finished products. All these vulnerabilities shall be accessed, okay, and to identify if they are significant or not. Again, a risk matrix similar to ASAP can be used. Let me share also some things or documents or that can indeed help you developing your food fraud mitigation plan. You can use these 4 tools. The SAF or SAFE and the PWC have developed a tool that performs a food fraud vulnerability assessment that is free of charge. Okay. Another options that you can find for assistance is the food fraud database from the European Commission. For instance, the Food Fraud Initiative from the Michigan State University, and FDA guidance, for instance, okay, for the industry. So my advice is that you can search more because there are several, but if you can search for these 4, because this can be a really good help for you to develop your food fraud. In the guidance, you can find 7 factors that they explain shall be taken in consideration when conducting a food fraud vulnerability assessment. Okay, first one, economical vulnerability. And the question is, how economically attractive is the fraud? Okay, because this is really a great drive. If the higher is the price, of course, the more probable people will do the fraudulent activities. Okay, another point, historical data. Has it happened before? Inside or outside the organization? Okay, this is important for you to access. Then detectability. This is how easy it is to detect. Can be detected in a routine control or by an untrained personnel or client, because of course, if it's easy to detect, as I explained, if it's easy for any person inside the organization to look and to detect that something is wrong, it's very unlikely that this kind of fraud can be successful. So it will be less probable. The access to raw materials, again, packaging materials and finished products, this also is important to understand and to access to define how probable food fraud is. Another interesting issue, the relationship with suppliers. Do you trust your supplier? Do you have a long relationship with your supplier? Well, this is important. Certification for fraud and authenticity. This can be found in some countries. If there are any independent sector specific control system for fraud and authenticity. If you can find that, if people have it, this is much better to control the possibility of food fraud. And last, the complexity of the supply chain. Okay, consider the supply chain length and the origins from the products. Okay, and how many times it is changed from hands, or how many times that's been processed before. All of these are factors that can condition the likelihood of the consequence. I did this little exercise. Okay, the objective of this slide is to explain how some of the examples that the guide provides can be considered when we are doing the matrix, okay? Where we are doing the food fraud, the vulnerability matrix. On the left, you have factors that impact the likelihood. For instance, economic vulnerability may be considered the most important for the likelihood. That's why I put it in bold. But of course, the historical data, relationship with supplier, complexity of supply chain, all these, as I tried to explain you before, can imply that the fraud is more likelihood or less likelihood. And of course, on the right, you have the consequences. Detectability, of course, as I explained it before, if it is easy to detect, well, the consequence will be less because probably people won't do it. For instance, in the case of ice cream, if there was a seal, probably the buyer will not take this box of ice cream because he noticed that was open before. Okay, this is an example. Another thing you must access is if there is really a direct food safety risk and how important it is, and indirect food safety risk and how important it is. After doing this, of course, we must implement proportional control measures for these assessments. Okay, going back to the diagram to try to finish it. Again, you must then document all your food fraud mitigation plan that, according with the guide, shall document vulnerability assessment, control measures, and also verification and incident management procedures. And now it's everything like the food defense. Should be supported by food safety management systems, okay? Should be revised and assessed for efficiency. And again, you should define trainings and communication strategy, okay? Also, for the food fraud, inside the guidance, you can find several questions that FSSC say the auditor will be looking for, okay? So check out these questions. This will help you to know exactly what you have to do. Now we are going to the logo use. Logo use is the last of the additional requirements that is applicable to all food categories. This requirement defines the clear rules regarding the use of FSSC 22000 logo, mainly to guarantee, in my opinion, that the consumer do not regard the food safety management system certification as a product certification. And if you look to the examples of what is accepted and not accepted, you can understand this better. This is why logo is not accepted in the product labeling, and in the product packaging, but it is accepted in marketing, organization, printed matter, website, promotion, okay? Everything that is related to the product should not have any logo. Another important issue that is inside this additional requirement is the colors that should be used in the logo, okay? It is very well specified, and for instance, this text box that has FSA logo has the colors according to the requirements of the standard, okay? And with this one, we finish the first 5 additional requirements that are used to all the scopes. Now we are going to move to the next 4 that are specific only for some of the scopes. Before that, let me share with you already some of the changes of these last 4. First, in management of allergens, that is the one that we are going to see right away, it was added 3 food categories more, okay? Now, category F1, G, and I, as are also included and shall also have a management of allergens, okay? Management of natural resources, it was an additional requirement that was removed with this new version, and transport and delivery was added now in this new version. Regarding management of allergens, on the left, you can see all the food categories that shall implement this additional requirement, and on the right, you have a diagram that's trying to simplify it. So, by the requirement, organization shall have a documented allergen management plan where a risk assessment covering all potential sources of allergen cross-contamination shall be included, and also the control measures necessary to reduce or eliminate the risk of cross-contamination, okay? So, we must do a risk assessment to identify all potential sources of cross-contamination and then implement control measures that reduce or eliminate. Environmental monitoring is the next additional requirement. On the left, again, all the food categories that must implement this additional requirement. And the main focus is to guarantee environmental is not a source of contamination, okay? A risk-based environmental program shall be in place, shall be documented, where you will identify source of contamination from the manufacturing environment, and at the minimum, microbiological and allergens, okay? And define controls. The effectiveness of the control measures shall be assessed, and very important, defining monitoring activities. Data of the monitoring activities shall be retained and trend analysis performed. Why? Because it's important to understand, to assess the results from the monitoring and see if there are any trends. If the trend is too moving out of control, you must take action before that happens. So we must look at trends from the monitoring activities. That is why it's so important to look at trends. Let's go to the next one, formulation of products. This is a simple additional requirement that is only applicable to animal feed production. Okay? In essence, organizations that produce animal feed shall have in place procedures to management the use of ingredients containing nutrients that can have an adverse impact on animal health. Okay? This is especially important for products used to feed different animals. Okay, so if the product aims to feed different animals, organization must address if any of the nutrients can have an adverse effect in one of the species. And this is why this additional requirement exists. And finally, the last additional requirement, mandatory for the FSSC 2000 version 5, is precisely the one that was added. Okay, this requirement aims to address the growing trend of retailers to deliver food directly to the consumer, the e-commerce. That is why it's only applicable for the food category, retail and wholesale. Okay, and this is to address that during transport, this organization shall ensure that the products are transported and delivered under conditions which minimize the potential for contamination. Okay. This is usually transport is not the core business of these organizations, and this additional requirements comes to say you must control it. You must guarantee that everything goes well and everything doesn't and minimize any potential contamination that can happen during transport. Okay, so with this we finish all the additional requirements. This is really brief. I hope you enjoy it, but I won't leave without talking about a topic that sometimes stress out people, especially for people that are not yet with FSSC 22000. That is unannounced audits. Okay, I would like to tell you first that to read about unannounced audits, you should go to part 3 of the scheme, where it says requirements for the certification process. Okay, it's inside part 3 that you can read more about unannounced audits. At the moment, what is mandatory is that one of the surveillance audits is unannounced. So, for instance, if you were certified into this year, next year, or the year before, one of those audits, the surveillance audits, will be unannounced. But you will ask, okay, Nuno, but what this means? This means that the auditor comes up one day out at our door and starting out auditing. Yes, that is exactly what happens. Okay, but this is some controls. Okay, this is not just like that. There are some issues that are and characteristics that are mandatory for the unannounced audits. Okay, some of them were changed in this version. Some of them are totally new. First thing I would like to share with you, the certification body, the date of the unannounced audit typically is after 8 to 12 months of the previous audit. Okay, so there is a close time frame that people can expect for the unannounced audit. Okay, before this time frame was larger, so this is not really new. This was changed, and now it's closer, it's smaller, and so organizations should expect the unannounced audit to be performed in this time frame, 8 or 12 months after previous audits. The unannounced audit takes place during normal operation working hours. Okay, blackout days shall be defined, or may, if the organization wants. What this means? It means that they can come in night shifts, of course, if necessary. Blackout days are days that are agreed in advance between the organization and the certification body for situations where there is, for instance, no production, or the company closes for vacations. So they set the dates that these unannounced audits cannot happen due to these issues that are defined. Okay, it must be defined, and the certification body must accept it. 1 hour to start. What this means? It means that the audit will start with an inspection of the production facilities, commencing within 1 hour after the auditor has arrived on the site. Okay, you can't leave him waiting for 2 or 3 hours in the waiting room. Okay, and for instance, if the certified organization refuses to participate in the unannounced audit, the certificate shall be suspended immediately. Okay, next point. All surveillance and even certification audits can be unannounced. And this is new, and this is voluntary. What this means? It means that the certified organization can now voluntarily choose to replace all surveillance audits by unannounced audits. And even recertification audits may be conducted unannounced. So if the organization defines and choose to do this, they can have all their audits unannounced. Okay, only the first one, the certification audit, remains mandatory to be announced. The last point I would like to share with you is that if parts of the audit plan cannot be audited, a follow-up audit will be scheduled. Okay, within 4 weeks. This is also new. This means that all the scheme requirements must be assessed, including production or service produced in operation. Okay, where part of the audit plan cannot be audited, an announced follow-up audit will be scheduled within 4 days. Okay, these are the main set of posts of unannounced audits that I would like to share with you, and I hope that helps demystify a little bit about unannounced audits. And well, this is really what I have for you today. I hope that you enjoy it, and thank you so much for watching this presentation.
And thank you, Nuno Soares, for that excellent look at version 5 of FSSC 22000. And that concludes this presentation.